to the greenhouse. It's March, and tomato seeds have popped out. Unfortunately, it's middle March, and tonight it's supposed to get down to 28 degrees, so I am working to keep my seedlings alive, but we should be okay. It usually happens about, I don't know, every year. Anyway, in the greenhouse, I'm telling stories. Tonight I want to tell you about a particular incident that happened back in high school. Back then I was dating a girl named Olga. She was a beautiful girl, very friendly, very fun, and her mother was certifiably insane. Anybody who knows her would tell you that the same thing is true. I'm not making this up. Anyway, we had been dating, I don't know, a couple of months, and Dot, her mom, decided that if I was going to continue to date her daughter, I was going to have to go to church with them. And so, you know, it was okay. I grew up in church. I'm a churched guy. I was well acquainted with that. It was not a scary thing. I was a little kid, went to Hurt Road Baptist Church, and then we moved to Powder Springs, and I'd gone to First Baptist Church of Powder Springs. I was actually baptized there, and then we later on had gone to Austell Presbyterian Church, where I happen to be an active member today. So the idea of going to church was not a big problem for me. The thing was, I didn't actually understand what church meant to them. See, they went to Mount Moriah Primitive Baptist Church. And this was a little brick building that sat 3 miles off a dirt road on Highway 61 between Dallas and Cartersville. And in 1980, you could not get any further from civilization if you wanted to. This place was in the middle of nowhere. And so, you know, of course, I agreed to go to church, and I was told, you know, be here about 9 o'clock on Sunday. And so I showed up to their house in Powder Springs about 9 o'clock in my cleanest clothes, you know, ready to go. Hopped in the car, and then we drove and drove and drove, and finally we're on this dirt road winding around, and we wind up going by the cemetery, and here's this little brick building. I'll never forget, as we're walking into the church, Olga pointed out the outhouse, because there was no running water in this building. And I'm not even sure they had electricity. Now, it was the mid-'80s, you know, so maybe they did, but I don't remember it. I know they didn't have an organ. And we went in, and people were already there, and they were already singing, and there was this tortured old upright piano that was vaguely in tune, banging out hymns from the shape note hymnal that they had there, and we went in and sat down and sang and sang and sang some more, and it was hot. I mean, it was already hot. It was 10 o'clock in the morning, and it was summertime in Georgia in this little brick building, and it had to have been 110 degrees. It was miserable. And we went in, and as you walked into the church, again, there was this old piano over to this side, and then there was the pulpit, and there was like a pew behind the pulpit, and there's like 5 or 6 guys sitting back there, and then there was some pews on the left, and this is where the old men were sitting. By old, I mean like 80s and 90s. I mean old men sitting over here. And on the piano side, there was a couple of pews, and there were the old women were sitting over here on this side, and then you had the pews, of course, down the middle, and they went chronologically from the middle age to the youth, and we, of course, were on the very back row, as close to the door out as we could possibly get. And we came into this church, and we began, you know, again, singing, and we sang and sang and sang, and then finally, after we were good and lathered up, you know, the first guy stands up, and he comes and begins to preach, and he stood up there and began to wheeze and scream and hyperventilate and turn red in the face and say I don't know what, but he just went on, and that's when I began to get the clue that I was someplace different, you know. And this guy, he screamed for a while, and then he ran out of steam, and they like tag teamed, you know. He would fall back, and then the next guy jumped up, and he would scream and hyperventilate and hoof and wheeze and throw out things, and and it kind of became a contest. You know, he would run out, and the next guy, and it was like be louder than the last guy, you know, and scream more and say less and wheeze and again, you know, I grew up in church. I was not an unchurched kid, but I was used to the Presbyterian church, where, you know, at exactly 11 o'clock the bell would ring, and the choir would come in, and the pastor in his robe would walk in and stand next to the big chair, and the choir would sing the beautiful introduction, and then we would all stand up and sing hymn 437 together with the organ and the piano in perfect harmony, and then we would sit down, and we had the call to confession, and we would read the responsive reading from the hymn book, and then, you know, the pastor would get up and preach for 12 minutes and give a very nice sermon about, you know, with a joke and 3 points and a prayer, and then we would all rise together and repeat the Apostles' Creed and the Lord's Prayer and have a song, and the choir would do the offertory where they would sing this beautiful rehearsed piece of music while they passed the plates, and then there was the benediction, and exactly 12 o'clock we all ushered out and shook the pastor's hand on the way to the parking lot. I mean, that was what church was for me. It was very Presbyterian, you know, very orderly and very in control. And here I find myself in this little brick building down this dirt road with an outhouse, and people standing up screaming at me about things that I couldn't comprehend because I really couldn't understand what they were saying. And all I know is that if I didn't already think I was in hell, I would have been convinced I was going to hell based on everything I was hearing from the guys who were up there screaming. And the next guy would jump in, and then finally, and the last one, I remember the last one very clearly. He was a very rotund man, you know, he was kind of portly, and he was wearing this navy blue polyester 3-piece suit with a big fat 70s tie, you know what I'm talking about? And his hair looked like it had been cut with tin snips, and it was just sticking out all over the place. And he got up, and he began to wheeze and to howl and to scream and to hyperventilate, and he started rocking back and forth, and he was screaming. His face was like red as a tomato, you know, like a tomato on a watermelon, with a blue suit on, up there screaming. And I began becoming fascinated because I realized as he was rocking and screaming that slobber was flying out of his mouth like a Saint Bernard. It was just flying out of his mouth down onto the vest of this polyester suit, and he kept rolling, and the slobber was flying out into the audience there, and I swear to God, he jumped up and he started going, and this string of snot flew out of his nose. It just flew out like silly string out of a can, and flew out and down onto his big fat stomach in this huge polyester suit, and I was like, he looked like snails were crawling all over him with this slobber and snot, and he just went on and on and on. And to this day, one of the most disgusting things I have ever experienced in my entire life. I couldn't tell you a word the man said, but I know when he left there, he had to get that suit clean because it was gross. Anyway. It finally was over, right? I mean, it's over. The service ends. It's like 1 o'clock in the afternoon. We had been there for a very long time, up and down. And we sang like 14 verses of Just As I Am. And as I recall, no one went forward because we were all ready to get out of there. And that's when the real miracle happened. A real, honest-to-goodness miracle. A miracle being the divine intervention of God in human affairs. It happened at this church on this day in 1980s, summertime. We came out of the church, and I thought it was done, right? I mean, I'm used to shaking the preacher's hand and going home. But we walk out, and that's when all the little old ladies start going out to their cars and pulling out dishes of food. And I realized that there was the picnic tables over by the cemetery. It's very telling. And they began setting all this food out over there. And we're talking like, you know, forced fried chicken and green beans and cream corn and stuff like deviled eggs and coleslaw and potato salad. I mean, mayonnaise heavy stuff that's been sitting in the Georgia sun inside of these cars for hours. They pull out and spread out, and all of those people go over and start eating as if they've never eaten before. And here's where the miracle happens. Because to my knowledge, no one died from food poisoning that day. And that was truly the grace of God. Anyway, kids, I can't make these stories up. This is a real story. It really happened. And I'll never forget the day I went to the Primitive Baptist Church. Olga, I love you. And I'm sure someday you might experience something similar. But I hope not. Anyway, I'm glad you're hanging out at the greenhouse with me. Hope you enjoyed this. And we'll definitely do this again. Till then, salute.